I'm Mehdi Hasan.
I'm Owen Jones.
And we are Two Outspoken. Owen, welcome to Washington, D.C.
I know, blimey.
We're not in London.
This is surreal, yeah.
You're in my town, dare I say my town.
I thought we were going to do a little march in the White House just to preempt what's about to happen.
No, we accept the results.
Oh, no, of course.
However bad they are. I was going to ask you on marches, just have a little chat about your D.C. experience. You've been sightseeing? You've gone anywhere nice?
Do you know what? This is pretty... I had a little chat with someone else. This is it, pretty much. This is me in DC.
You didn't do the memorials?
I know. I got to check out all the tourism hotspots.
I was on Good Morning Britain on election night with your best friend, Ed Balls. And he was saying, Ed and Susanna were saying they had a lovely walk around the memorials. People do love... DC is a great place for memorials.
Just imagine a lovely romantic walk around the memorials with Ed Balls. I have been travelling around the US, though. It's not the state, I know.
I saw you in Milwaukee.
So Wisconsin, yeah. Went to Pennsylvania. Went to Michigan. Went to North Carolina.
So did you see this coming while you were in the swing states? Did you feel it hours before the polls closed?
I was just veering all over the place. One moment I thought he'd win, another I thought she'd edge it. I'm just going to be honest.
The vibes were all over the place. Me and my team were talking about this on like Sunday,
what did you think? Go on, what was your prediction?
No, I didn't. I've stopped doing predictions since 2016. I felt in my gut that she had a good chance of winning. My head said Trump would win, my heart said Harris. And then at the weekend, that Iowa poll came out, and we all hoped for a little bit that he might lose.
Seltzer's had a mare. Everyone was like, wow, yes, Seltzer's never
wrong. The gold
wrong.
standard of pollsters. And I remember thinking, like, literally day to day, the vibes are changing. This is insane. This is not how we should cover an election. Isn't the French who banned polls in the last few days?
And the Spanish.
Maybe that's something we should think about, because it really does wreck our entire coverage. All right, let's jump into it. I'm kind of trumped out. I want to talk Democrats.
Well, you're trumped out.
I'm trumped out.
Bad luck, Mehdi. I've got some very, very bad news for you.
Do I have to think about him again?
Oh dear,
in a few weeks, January 20th. Let's talk about Democrats and the left and progressives and where they go from here. The classic post-election question. I want to read to you a quote which I'm sure you've seen and covered. Bernie Sanders yesterday. It should come as no great surprise that a Democratic Party which has abandoned working class people would find that the working class has abandoned them. Now, that tweet has been met with, it's had 500,000 likes, but it's been met with a lot of reaction, both positive, people saying, yep, exactly. This is the Democrats screwing the little guy. They're no longer the party of the workers. And then there's others saying Bernie's completely misread what happened. It's just completely unfair to what Biden and Democrats did. Where do you stand on this?
I'm Bernie in that. So there's a lot of discussion about real wages and statistics, which is a problem because...
Do you not like statistics?
No, it's just it's when you get bogged, because at the moment it's all about statistics in terms of GDP growth and the economy, and the problem is what the statistics say and what people feel. And I think there are three big issues which are part of the problem. One, which is what Bernie Sanders talks about there, which is the stagnation and decline that workers have suffered for 50 years.
Yes.
So you have to go back to Richard Nixon. But that's the real hourly wages of most American workers are the same as they were when Richard Nixon was in the White House half a century ago. That has political consequences. One of them was actually the rise of Bernie Sanders in 2016. That's what we've seen this across the Western world. You got the rise of the left in some cases as a response to that, and you also got the rise of right-wing authoritarianism. That was Trumpism. The other is that if you look at real wages, so Bankrate, they do this analysis of wages. They're a New York-based consumer financial services company. They say that wages increased by 17.4% between the time that Joe Biden had his inauguration and the summer of this year, but prices rose 20% over the same period. Now, under Donald Trump, and this is not me, I'm not now going to get my MAGA cap out, Donald Trump, real wages objectively increased. Now, the reason it's not down to him is they start to increase from 2014 onwards when Barack Obama...
He inherited the Obama economy,
Exactly. So it's not...
Now he's going to inherit the Biden economy, luckiest man in the world.
Well, because real wages are set to increase in the coming months. The problem is, so there's the other problem, this is the third element, is people say, well, actually, if you look across kind of overall the Biden administration, it dipped steeply, real wages for many people, for a lot of Americans, but then recovered. But people, that dip, that pain is something people remember acutely. So even if you get a recovery, if you look throughout history, actually, a lot of revolutions have happened when people have suffered a dramatic decrease in their living standards and then they start to improve. So it's that experience people suffered. A lot of Americans, it differed. Some Americans didn't suffer as much as others. But if you look at food prices, the dramatic increase in food prices, that is burned onto people's memories, and people remember the real wages increasing under Trump.
Well,
but under Biden, you've seen stagnation, and that's been a lot.
We can have a whole different discussion about the fact that we're in this mess because most Americans don't remember anything, right? They had the memory of goldfish. It's a reality.
Well, that's the American audience. Hi, America.
Yeah, and I'll say this very happily. When people say to me, Americans say to me, we survived Trump once, I have to remind them that 500,000 people died in his last year in office and that he left the economy in the ditch. But let's just talk about a few things there, because you mentioned a few different things. One is, let's agree that people are hurting and have been hurting for a while. I'm glad you went right back to Nixon, because sometimes when you talk about this stuff, people go, are you dismissing the fact that people are living in poverty and that people are struggling? No, but those are systemic problems in the US economy that transcend presidencies, right? If we're just talking about actual records of presidents, then you're right to bring it back to real wages, for example. First of all, can we agree that there's no singular explanation for why the Democrats...
100%.
We're talking less than 48 hours after the defeat. It's too... I'm with Jon Stewart. People who say the morning after, this is what's going to happen and this is why they lost.
Because we're only talking about a minority of voters. We're talking about, because you have a Democratic bloc and a Republican bloc, and then you have the swing voters who helped determine
what happened. You also have an unprecedented swing to Trump, which is going to require a long time to work out exactly what across the board.
But we're talking about why 20% of the American population, for example, behave in the way they did.
So on the real wages front, first of all, again, it depends where you start the clock. If you start the clock in September 2020 and compare it to September 2024, real wages are up, right? Those are the numbers. And also, you start with Biden in 2021. Don't forget there was a pandemic, and the pandemic actually messed up all the numbers. So a lot of economists say you've got to compare 2019 to 2024, because what happened in 2020 is a lot of people, a lot of low-wage people lost their jobs, couldn't work from home. So it changed the whole compositional effect of the workforce. It gave real wages a weird increase that didn't reflect the actual reality on the ground, because people were unemployed. There were no wages. So when you look at 2019 to 2024, 2023, for example, you actually see, and a lot of people have been sharing these graphs online, that the lowest income workers actually had the biggest increase in wages, actually more. 80% of American workers saw the real wages go up. The people who didn't see real wages go up were actually the richest. So just to be, and let's broaden it past wages. If Bernie's right, and I have a lot of sympathy for the Bernie position, I'm a Bernie fan, I agree with Bernie's policy positions, but I worry that by doing this, you're actually throwing under the bus some of the good things that the Democrats did, right? Pre-October the 7th, I actually was praising Joe Biden because he was good on domestic policy. He was the first president to walk on a picket line. He was a very strong pro-labor record, which is why actually Harris has won a higher percentage of union voters than Biden did. Unions understood.
It's unfortunately only about 11% of the workforce.
Small, exactly. But here's what's interesting, right? When you say that the Democratic Party turned its back on the working class, I do feel we're slightly infantilizing voters here, because you say, well, how do they feel? Facts matter as well, right? The Democrats and Biden saved 1.2 million union pensions, including 600,000 Teamsters, right? The Teamsters union. Not a single Republican voted to save those pensions. And yet, 60% of Teamsters union members said they're supporting Trump. Right? What do you do in that situation? As a Democrat, to be fair to Democrats, and I think I'm pretty critical of Democrats, so let me be fair to Democrats in the conversation. If you're Biden, you're like, what are you talking about? I saved your pensions. I put in a pro-labor person at the National Labor Relations Board. I put Lena Khan in at the FTC to bust monopolies, and still I'm accused of throwing the working class under the bus. What do you do in that situation?
Well, I mean, first, you focus...
Is that not fair?
Well, I mean, look, yes, I suppose you could argue in that particular case. But
it's a pretty big case. He saved hundreds of thousands of pensions, and they went, we're voting for Trump. I don't think you can say it's economics. I think those people are voting on a whole host of other issues.
No, I get
cultural resentment,
I just
whatever
don't
you
know
want to call it, racism.
I don't know how the Teamsters voted in 2020. I just can't compare the two, so I don't know if there's a shift.
I'm not even comparing 2020 24. I'm saying the Teamsters union refused to endorse this year because they did an internal poll.
No, I know.
60% of their members said, we support Trump.
I was talking...
But why do they support Trump, Owen, if the Republicans screwed their pensions? If this is a material explanation, I don't get it.
Well, because again, what we're talking about, look, lots of low-paid and middle-income workers voted for the Democrats, and a large number of rich people.
Trump actually won more of the under 100 grand, which is amazing, which he didn't do in 2020.
I appreciate that, but we're looking at each voter coalition, and we're looking at why did a minority shift in one direction, and why didn't others vote for the Democrats? Because a large part of this story, we don't have the final vote tally at the moment, is people not turning out to vote. So you then get a shrinking pie of voters.
The turnout is a huge
So then what happens is the percentage of people voting for the Republicans amongst any group is inflated because the overall number of people who voted at all. So it's important that we don't allow that to be distorted. But at the same time, for middle income, you mentioned low income workers, and that's actually true if you look at a lot of the statistics. Yeah. But for a lot of middle income workers, that's not true. They were squeezed, and they are working class Americans. These are people.
No, there's no debate that housing costs are massive. Rents, mortgages.
Exactly, and this is the problem because there's often, and the left sometimes falls into this trap, which is to conflate the working class with the poorest people in society. Yep. And the working class includes people who have, go on holidays, have a car or two cars, and have a family. They're not below the poverty line, but they often have to think about how they spend their money. Now, the facts are, and this isn't down to Donald Trump, the facts are real wages rose under the Trump presidency better in that 4 years than they pretty much have in the last half a century. That's just
although wages today, just to throw facts in, are higher today than they were forecast to be even before the pandemic. As is joblessness, as is unemployment.
Well, we
have the highest labour participation rate.
I've just shown there suggest that pretty much real wages overall are pretty much the same as they were when Joe Biden became president. The problem with
your starting point is then I'm saying you cannot just erase the pandemic from this discussion. In fact, all incumbent governments have been chucked out
I get
because of the pandemic.
But you can say
in the UK, Tories, in the US, Democrats, in India, Modi lost his majority.
We've got to be careful there because you're absolutely right. You could say on one level, well, this is grossly unfair because we had the biggest public health emergency in a century, and
all incumbents are taking a beating,
and everyone suffers the consequences. But that doesn't mean that the Democrats couldn't have offered a more...
No, but this
is the point. A compelling offer
Agreed.
that actually deals with the economic pain and insecurity that people feel.
Agreed.
Because what you had instead were Democratic outriders talking about a so-called vibe session, which was, are you all stupid, the stock market's doing well and the economy's doing well, when the facts are, for living standards, whatever the factors, whatever the reality, living standards for large chunks of Americans aren't different from where they were before. People felt the pain of food prices going up very quickly.
But inflation is not a left-right issue, right? As I said to you, the British government had inflation under the Tories and got punished for it.
But the question is what you do about it. The French government, whatever I think about Macron, they actually used government intervention to deal with that.
Well, so did Biden. I mean, this is what I'm saying. Here's where I slightly disagree with you. I agree with you they should have made a more compelling offer, 100%. But I also think they should have communicated what they did. I mean, the problem is a lot of people, Americans don't have a clue what the Democrats actually did for them. See, Trump is a master of doing very little, but exaggerating the shit out of it and banging, I signed your checks for you. These guys actually did a lot of good work on the economy. People aren't aware.
Yeah, but the problem is, look, Kamala Harris did, to an extent, lean far too into what you just suggested she did, because a month ago she appeared on television and she was asked what she would do differently.
Oh yeah, that was one of the moments she lost.
But just quickly, what she would have done differently from Biden, and she said that she wouldn't have done anything different. And
that was mad.
He was at the time minus 15 in approval ratings.
That was mad.
The fact is, for lots of Americans, 60%, I mean, look, Bernie Sanders made this point, 60% of the American population live paycheck to paycheck. They are one paycheck away from poverty and hardship. And if you've gone through half a century of living standards stagnating in the way that they have for many American workers, if you have, unfortunately, due to circumstances which were not to do with Trump, living standards did increase in that period when he was president, and then you get a stagnation, people then expect, the Democrats
I'm not debating the living standards. No, I know, we had 22. We had record inflation in 2022.
Yeah.
No, that's not a left-right issue, right? That was a pandemic.
People
consequence.
Feel that sudden pain, and it's searing.
Although I do find the inflation thing quite humorous, because if you're that worried about inflation, you just put into the White House a man who's going to increase prices with tariffs very soon. And by the way, on the material, so I'm a lefty. I support all the policies you support and Bernie Sanders supports. The difference is I support them for moral reasons. I'm not someone who believes that if you just offer all these policies, they're going to be electoral magic. I see a lot of lefties being like, Bernie would have won if you offered these policies. I don't buy that. I'm sorry. America is actually much more torn apart by culture and race than it is
I get that.
The economics. I'll give you one example, though. Okay. In California, progressive, liberal, blue California, they just rejected a ballot initiative to bring in rent control. So on the one hand, you have people complaining, why don't Democrats do more about rent? They turned down, the public turned up.
In some red states, they backed progressive
But this is exactly my point. There's no uniform material explanation. No. You have to vary it state by state. In Missouri, where they backed a minimum wage increase and protected abortion rights, the same voters tick the box for Trump and Hawley, people who don't support a minimum wage rise or abortion rights. So I think it's much more complicated than people are trying to make out. And one last example, Owen, Sherrod Brown, Ohio.
Yeah, of course.
Populist, ran on all the things that Bernie runs on, lost.
Yeah,
it's not a magic bullet.
No, but that said, the Democratic ticket as a whole was dragged down by a backlash against incumbency, which you see across the Western world.
Which I agree.
But the only way of overcoming that, and you might...
was to have an ambitious
But
program.
that's where we agree. People might say, look, actually, if you look across the board, it would have been impossible. That's a legitimate argument to have made.
But they should have tried harder.
But what you didn't get from Harris was an understanding that people are angry and saying, well, actually, the system is broken.
And give them someone to target that anger towards.
Exactly. We need that, but we need to do something to address the crisis in living standards you felt. Yes, not enough to say, well, actually, things have done, and the pandemic got in the way and all the rest of it. But to show something. The point about Bernie Sanders that I just quickly make is this, and I think this is a bit of self-criticism on the left that is necessary. The problem the left has a lot of the time is those who are naturally sympathetic to the left. There's a division, which is often people who are university, college educated, and we've seen an expansion of the number of people going to university. These are not privileged students or from privileged backgrounds, as a lot of people think. They're often the first of their family to go, but they're more politically engaged and active and socially progressive. And then you get other older, often working class Americans who aren't college educated and are less politically engaged. What Bernie Sanders did was manage to straddle that divide. He managed to make a lot of people in America and elsewhere who look at the left and regard the left as culturally alien, as not living on the same planet as us, as not speaking in the way that we understand. He managed to find a way of getting the kind of hipster in Brooklyn who's got their Free Palestine badge on their T-shirt. And, although he pissed off quite a lot of them for a period, but he did, that's the sort of cohort he brought. Plus, the sorts of often blue-collar Americans who otherwise feel angry at the system, want the system to be taken down, and went to Trump.
And Latino voters in places like Nevada who went to Trump were very popular with Bernie. Agreed. Look, I'm going to agree with you on two things 100%. One is there should have been a more ambitious offer and acknowledgement of the anger and a channeling of the anger. I don't know if you've seen the reports in The Atlantic today that she was advised by her brother-in-law, Kamala Harris. Her brother-in-law is Tony West, the chief legal officer for Uber. Who told her to lay off the billionaires. So if you remember in July, August, her and Waltz were going after some of the 1%ers, being a bit more
populist.
popular.
The New Times said that showed how the business community were optimistic because she'd cut down on that rhetoric and all the rest of it.
So she was advised, apparently, by her brother-in-law, reportedly, that's madness. You need to channel. I was talking to Ryan Grimm on Mehdi Unfiltered this week, and he made the same point. She should have gone after the price gouges. Biden should have gone after the meat companies that were, greedflation should have been part of the Biden presidency and the Harris campaign.
Trump has economic populism.
100%. Agree.
Because when I went to the Trump rally, this is the other part of it is what they would talk about if I talked to Trump supporters. They'd obviously talk about migrants and the borders, often in very inflammatory terms. And that is obviously part of it. This is why the Trump coalition, if you like, there are the irreconcilables. There are those who believe that white America has an existential threat to it. There's a demographic time bomb. They're running out of time. And if we want to save white America, then we have to get Trump in power. That's one chunk of people, regardless of their class. Some of them are genteel, privileged Americans. Others are low-paid workers. That they exist. Then there are others who obviously think the system is broken and want someone to channel that anger in some direction. But when I spoke to them, as well as migrants,
there's some who are both, by the way. There are some who are both.
No, I know. There's who
are super racist but want economic intervention. There's a name for people.
You
like
see
that
this in Germany.
From history.
I don't think we should go down that route. The Nazis. That's going a little bit. The Nazis are socialists. Well, it's just a bit. The Nazis.
Well, they're nationalists and they're socialists.
They're not effing socialists. All right, let's just park that one.
But a lot of people. But you know that the far right does like a bit of economic intervention. Marine Le Pen and others.
The far right are shapeshifters and they're opportunistic and they will shapeshift accordingly.
Strain, right?
Yeah, of course, that's true. But I think the other point they would talk about, and this I found that I was kind of shocked by this. I was surprised because all of them talked about inflation. The message discipline I got from Trump supporters in every state was astonishing. But
that's another key point. Yeah.
So inflation was one of them, and the other, of course, was migrants. But the other was war. They sounded a lot like anti-migrant peaceniks. A lot of them, the way they would speak about they felt they had a sense of the world going to shit, basically. And again, you might say this is, look, whatever we think about the the facilitation of Israel's genocide by the Biden administration, the Russian invasion of Ukraine and 7th of October didn't happen because of Biden. But the fact that you've got these two cataclysmic horrors happening at the same time fed into a general sense of the world is going to shit.
Yes.
And that is definitely because the reason I find it so shocking is because I'm a geriatric millennial. Obviously, I'm still younger than you, though. But we were both around under George W. Bush and the neocons. The GOP were the neocon party. They were the let's go around invading everywhere. And now the grassroots are people who talk about the Iraq war as a catastrophe, whilst Donald Trump does speeches excoriating the Democrats for having the Muslim killing Liz Cheney at the forefront.
Which, of course, is a fraud. He's a fraud when he does that.
Of course,
obviously.
he's a fraud.
We should point out he's just appointed Brian Hook, hardcore neocon, to run his State Department transition, literally day one of his president-elect period after pretending to be a peace candidate in Dearborn, Michigan.
But the fact the Democrats gave an opening for this opportunism is ridiculous.
We said that. Yeah, I agree. Let me further agree with you before I disagree, which is I agree with you about the messaging on Bernie, right? You hit the nail on the head. The language he used. A lot of people have said to me since Tuesday, well, Trump talks in the way that people get, which I find insane because he talks like an insane man. But I get it, right? He talks not like a politician, I guess, is the code. One thing I would, though, turn on its head is I think Bernie and Trump are quite unique individuals. It's very hard to replicate what they do. There have been other leftist candidates who run like Bernie and haven't won in primaries or general elections. Like it's not a perfect record. Same with Trump. The only good news, I feel, is that there's no natural heir to Trump. I don't think J.D. Vance has either his following or his charisma or any kind of, his Teflon nature. Trump has that apprentice rep built in. As one former Democratic strategist said to me this week, he won this election 15 years ago when he started The Apprentice, or whenever it was he started The Apprentice. Right? There's a lot of low information and working class voters who know nothing about politics, but they think he's a billionaire and he's a businessman and he'll fix the government.
That came up a lot from often ex-miners I spoke to. But I think what both Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump have in common is that an understanding that if you don't define yourself, you will always be defined by your opponent.
And also define your enemy, right?
Well, exactly. But
Trump's enemies are Mexicans, Muslims, transgender elite. Bernie has good enemies, big pharma, etc. Healthcare companies exploiting us. Here's where I slightly disagree with you, though. Just coming back to the point about, you said something right at the top. You said, well, facts, statistics, but how you feel. That sets off all sorts of alarm bells in me because I spent 10 years dealing with people just living in cocoons. And I don't know if you saw the Ipsos Mori polling from a few months ago, which showed that, surprise, Republican voters, when asked, think inflation is super high right now. It's not. They think crime is super high right now. It's at record lows. They think unemployment's high. It's at record lows. They think border crossings are high. Border crossings are lower now than when Trump left office. So, Mehdi, and those people all voted for Trump, and the people who don't believe that voted for Harris. I believe that's a huge... I don't know what the word I'm looking for here, but I think that's an existential question for American democracy. If people are so in a bubble of misinformation that you can have all these arguments about who's doing well, who's doing badly. It comes back to my point about Biden. How would people know they're doing well if they're told every night on Fox that they're not doing well?
But I have to take you up on the inflation point there, because this is often something which is, I think, badly communicated by people.
Was inflation high? Yes. Is it now? No.
But this is the point. When people say that, you're saying, well, they think inflation is still really high, but it isn't.
Yeah.
Inflation is, as we both know, the rate at which prices
So cumulatively prices are 20%
higher. But this
higher.
is the point. So look, so you get prices, what they're peaked. They got by at one point 11%.
But nobody's trying to bring prices down. You don't want deflation.
No, I know, but I'm not saying that. I'm saying you get a sudden increase in prices, and then the rate at which they increase after that has gone down, but it's still increasing. So what the average American sees isn't on their phone, they go, oh, it's 3% now. What they see is prices have gone up dramatically.
Yes.
And I know you'll say we don't want deflation, that's bad for the economy, but how you feel is prices have gone up, that's now baked in, they're permanently high they were, and then they're still going up just at a lower pace. People felt the dramatic wage increase
have outstripped prices in the last few years.
We're going to have to, compared to the beginning of 2021. We're going to
have to continue this afterward when we have our relative stats. Let me add something to that. I'll make you a bet right now. I'm a Muslim, so it's a sportsman's bet. No cash will change hands. I will make you a bet right now that come January 20th, or maybe earlier, you will see the same people in the polls who said inflation is high. They'll say it's not high anymore. You know why? Because they're guys in the White House. This is why it's bullshit to come up with these only material explanations.
It depends which Americans you're talking about.
I'll tell you right now.
Because they're not homogenous.
Because we've seen it before. In 2021, when Biden became president, you know what happened to economic contentment, people's perceptions of the economy? You can go back and look at the graph. It went like this. All the Republicans said the economy's horrible.
Yeah, but
Hold on, let me finish.
Yeah.
The economy, when Biden was sworn in, literally overnight, Republicans said the economy's horrible. The day before, they said it was wonderful. And Democrats said the economy is really getting better and good. And the day before they started.
But this
is partisanship is what drives a lot of people.
I was going to say, because
you go back to your point about the calculator.
Okay.
I go even further. They're not even basing it on their grocery store experience. They're basing it on partisanship.
I wouldn't accuse you of this because you're obviously not a partisan Democrat supporter.
I'm just pointing out the partisanship.
But what
is
you're saying
is
it's the equivalent of Democrats who start crying about deportations of migrants when Trump's in power, and then as soon as Trump's not there
that's
anymore,
slightly different.
Why?
I'll tell you why it's slightly different. Because that's about a policy which they turned a blind eye to when their guy was doing it, and now they're suddenly outraged about it. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about economic indicators, where you're telling me today, I feel bad about I feel poorer. I feel like I can't afford stuff, and the next day I feel like I can.
No,
That's
I get
bullshit.
that. But 50% of America are not, or plus. Sorry, not of America. 50% of those who voted in this election, which is a minority, I get. But that chunk they're not all Trump supporting robots and
I'm not
drones.
saying they are.
I know there's a chunk. There's about 30% of America.
I'm just telling you that you're telling me you went and spoke to Republicans at rallies who told you they're all messaged this with inflation. Yeah, because it's a partisan talking point. It's not based on.
Let's be clear.
I made my bet. You can take me up on my bet or not.
But I'm saying that clearly the Trump till I die loyalists, who are a big chunk of the Trump coalition, are going to do that. But a lot of other Americans who, frankly, would have voted for Bernie Sanders or did actually vote for Joe Biden last time,
they voted for the pro-inflation candidate. Let's just be clear.
Yeah, but we know that. I get he didn't have, but that's more of a damning indictment of the Democrats. The fact is, they didn't offer a convincing policy which Americans who are struggling felt would address their squeeze in living standards. So
I get that, but I'm not going to infantilize American voters and say, therefore they embrace Donald Trump, who's going to destroy the economy, jack up prices, raise unemployment, etc., etc.
No,
that's my point.
I do think you can critique the Democrats. I'm not saying
I am critiquing the Democrats. I'm just saying I don't give a pass to voters in the way that you seem to be.
Why the hell did the Democrats allow a situation where they didn't channel people's anger and offer
I've been saying that all week, all month.
Because we should say,
but I'm just saying we can walk and chew gum at the same time. We can criticize the Democrats for not offering a more ambitious economic agenda while saying that's not the only reason they lost. But we can also say that we have a huge misinformation and partisanship crisis in America where people are not voting based on rational calculation or economic considerations. And we're going to see that now in January when prices jack up under Trump because of tariffs, and you won't have the same anger over inflation.
We need to be careful that we don't, because I think, again, I'm not accusing you of being a resistance Democrat, but you do get the resistance type Democrats who start catastrophizing and just suggesting, all of a sudden it all fall apart. I remember when Trump was in power, every day was like, it's going to fall apart tomorrow. He's going to get arrested tomorrow.
It did fall apart. He left every Republican president leaves the economy in a ditch. George W. Bush to Barack Obama.
I get that.
Donald Trump too. And by the way, he's now going to inherit this economy, and all the things that you say are, that might be Democrat resistance, insensitive to American concerns. He's going to be the one flagging all these statistics. I don't know if you saw Obama's brilliant speech last week where he said, Trump, you heard Trump bragging about his economy. Yeah, I gave him that economy, which is factually
I get
true.
That, but he's
going to love this Biden economy the minute he inherits it. What I'm worried about
is indulging a narrative by the establishment Democrats
that nothing was wrong.
Basically,
and we did
the economic system was, and this is some sort of mass hysteria or mass delusion.
No, but I think
that will then stop the Democrats from coming up with a compelling argument. Because all they're going to do now is say,
but I think you also need to reflect as well. This is why I started with the Bernie Sanders comparison. We both like Bernie, but I come at it, as I say, I support Bernie's policies because I think they're the right policies. I don't believe they're necessarily electoral panacea. And I think both sides need to self-reflect. I think liberals, yes, need to reflect. They can't just blame the American public. They need to. People are saying it was a flawless campaign. What a load of bullshit. She needed to do much more than she did, and she could have done. But at the same time, we also shouldn't just go, well, this idea that Democrats abandon working people, because then really, as the Democrats shift to the right, which we know they will, you're going to be like, well, actually, one president did try to do something right on workers. Biden did. He did come up with Bidenomics, which was laughed at and attacked, but actually did involve rebuilding industrial base, bringing back jobs from offshore, highest labor participation rate of our lifetimes. All of those things. I'll also throw in Afghanistan. Right. He was actually, quote unquote, until Gaza, an anti-war president who ended America's longest war. Didn't get any reward for it. That's the moment his polls collapsed. I think no other American president will do that again, because they'll do like, Biden did it. There's no way I'm ending a war.
Well, but that's why the battle for the narrative is so important, because I think you're being fatalistic there. That's my worry, which is about how, because look, it was always going to be the case. I remember before the election, you got various people on the left saying, well, if Trump wins, will it be better or worse for the left or Biden? It was always going to be.
Well, neither of us are accelerationists,
but it was, no, clearly not. Obviously, didn't want Trump to win, but it was always going to be for the Democratic establishment. heads we win, tails you lose.
Yes.
It was always going to be bad for the left and justification for shifting to the right.
Well, before we run out of time, maybe let's just pivot to that. The Washington Post ran a headline this week saying Harris's loss is a stinging verdict for the left. What the fuck are they talking about, Owen?
Comrade fucking Kamala
Communist Kamala, as Donald calls that. I mean, what is it? How, as you say, heads I win, tails you. Not just the Democrats doing that. It's the media establishment, the morning, everyone's saying, she was too left-wing. What? Were you watching the same election?
It's a self-serving narrative. For these people, anything... Well, they want a Democratic Party, which is... they don't want it to be uncouth and crude in the way that Trump presents his form of politics. They want an establishment party which is, socially liberal to a degree. It's certainly in presentation, though they don't care about deporting migrants or anything like that. But they want it to allow them to feel like they're the nice guys in
but not
politics.
Too much, not woke,
but not
trans.
Exactly. But without in any way upsetting the status quo and challenging the distribution of wealth and power in the United States.
Yes.
And they will seize on any opportunity they can to police the parameters of what's acceptable political debate within the Democratic Party, because they want the Democratic Party to avoid doing anything which challenges the power and the wealth, but also which concentrates in so few hands. But just quickly, just on that, the fact is. What Kamala Harris, the campaign she ran, was one which, again, we can't allow history to be revised, because in these newspapers, they were lauding commentators, the fact she was seen as more pro-business and abandoning what was seen as, the fact that Bernie Sanders had an in with Joe Biden. Yeah. And we can't forget that. But now they're just trying to revise history, but we can't let them revise history.
No, it goes back to your point about the narratives, right? It's not just about policing the left, it's blaming the left, right? It's another way of not dealing with why did we lose? And again, I think it's unfair to say they lost because Harris ran a bad campaign or because Democrats abandoned the working party. As we agreed, there are many explanations. No. Incumbency, inflation, racism, there's a misogyny. There are many reasons. But to blame, I think the left is at the bottom of the list. No,
actually, just to
prove, I wish the left had done that.
Just to prove the point, actually, and I think this is a big mistake on the part of the left, because the kind of Bernie AOC lot were desperate in the end for Joe Biden to stay in.
Yeah, they stayed well beyond.
Even when he was clearly just literally falling apart before our eyes, because they thought to themselves, Joe, because Bernie
He's been good to us.
He would pick up the phone to Bernie Sanders. They'd talk to each other and all the rest of it, and they knew they'd be out on the cold with Kamala Harris. They knew that she wouldn't indulge that kind of, they didn't think, because Bernie Sanders, to his credit, so it's really important that he's not accused of doing it after the event or the benefit. He said at the beginning that the Democrats need to run on a bread and butter campaign which addresses the issues that affect working people, and they self-evidently didn't do that. They rejected the left's advice, which was, the de facto leader of the left, Bernie Sanders. He offered his advice, and it was clearly rejected. Instead, they went on, let's defend democracy, which I'm sorry to lots of people seems like an abstraction, and on defending the right of women to choose, which I'm not saying isn't
the walk and chew gum at the same time. I believe you can defend democracy, which needs to be defended, but also economic democracy is democracy as well. Right? Agree, empowering workers. Bernie's made that point. But, the stinging verdict on the left is so funny because they literally got what they wanted.
What was the left policy they're talking about? What are they even talking about?
Not just the policy, just even the presentation. They got a prosecutor. I know, and the funny thing is, people started wheeling out defund the police. No one said the words defund the police for 4 years, right? But defund the police made it. Richie Torres, the very pro-Israel right-wing Democrat who used to pretend to be a left-wing Democrat, he's like, it's the fault of the far left and indulging the far left. And when I hear this stuff, I'm like, stop promising.
And she said, I'm going to put Republicans
Stop wishing me a good time. I wish the left got indulged. She was a prosecutor. She bragged about owning a gun.
She wanted the Republicans in her government.
What's the only thing you would do different to Biden? When she was eventually asked on that same View episode, about minutes later, when she finally gave an answer, she went, I'd have a Republican in my cabinet.
Liz Cheney was there fronting everything.
Crazy statistic. In the month of October, she campaigned with Cheney more than any other surrogate.
Wow.
In the month of October. She campaigned with Mark Cuban more than she campaigned with Sean Fain, the union leader in Michigan.
She did their campaign playbook. She did everything they wanted.
Clinton 2.0 in many ways. She said, I want a lethal military. All of that stuff. She disowned all of her progressive views from 2019, 2020. Fracking.
Israel's right to self-defense.
Israel's right to self-defense. Big on fracking. So this idea that the left is to blame is one of the most insane things. But I heard it the morning after, not just from media folks. I heard it from ordinary people whose instinctive move in America. I heard it from friends of mine saying, well, I guess they were too left-wing. I was like, what are you talking about?
But this is what narrative is obviously very important, because the problem we have is they have far more power to define the narrative than we do, which is why the likes of Zeteo are so important. That is the last. Look, we saw the left needs a Joe Rogan, all that kind of thing. There is an issue, which is there is a big ecosystem on the right and the centrists who run the newspapers that they get to define the narrative, and it becomes the common sense. And the left has to find ways of fighting that.
So to circle back and give myself the last word, I would say you just need to add to that. I agree with you, but it's not just the narrative that they're creating. They're actually creating a false reality, a disinformation chamber, which allows people to think things about crime, the economy, immigration, which aren't true. And I think the left also has to acknowledge that it's not enough Birdie style to go, we'll offer you $20 minimum wage, and believe that will cut through the noise and the disinformation and the spin and the lies. I think we also have to think about how we deal with
just quickly, because I know that was your last word, but that is the actually only hope for something cutting through, because that's the problem. You get lots of disinformation, and then you just get a democratic, nebulous campaign with no clear messaging whatsoever, and then obviously the vacuum is just filled with misinformation. They did it to themselves, just them, and that's what really hurts.
Well, we're all going to be hurting soon, including a lot of Trump voters who are going to wake up to the fact that they're going to have to pay high prices.
Don't smile about it.
I won't smile. A lot of Trump voters are going to have to wake up to the fact they're going to be paying high prices. Owen, thank you very much. Lovely to see you here in DC. I don't know where we'll next meet each other, in which city of the world, or on which
where would you like to go?
On which online platform we'll zoom in. Thank you for being here.
Good to see you, buddy.
We will talk soon. We've been Two Outspoken, I guess.
See you in a bit, guys.
Did you like this video? Don't forget to subscribe to this YouTube channel and turn on notifications. For exclusive content and to support our independent, unfiltered journalism, head over to Zeteo.com. Your support matters.